Alright, everybody, we are back and live. This slate eerily reminiscent of Sunday night, not quite as many projected blowouts. But again, a four-game slate with any amount of weird shittery up in the air for possibly occurring today. Going live a couple minutes early again just to allow people to get into the room, make sure the audio is working, the various other problems that have bedeviled me over the last week. I have no reason to expect any of that to recur, to be sure. But might as well be safe, give ourselves the full hour for this four-game slate. In theory, Anthony Davis will be back tomorrow, so that'll be interesting to talk about. Imagine the nerve of that guy, stifling the development of Christian Wood. Alright, let us see what we have. Very good, very good, very good. So, I'll give it a couple more minutes so we have some time. What are interesting things we can discuss for a minute before we get going fully? Again, the news that Kyle Kuzma will not play certainly should be instructive for how we take a look at this evening. Looking at the games in general, again, starting off at 8 p.m., the Lakers going into Oklahoma City, favored by 13. Feels like Sunday. The Hawks going into San Antonio, favored by 11. Feels a little dicey. The one reasonably close game we expect, Houston pacing up going into Sacramento, pacing down at home. Only 5.5 point dogs for the Kings. The closest game of the evening and the late night hammer if you were a excellent basketball game with the Warriors at home favored by 8.5 against Denver. Brilliant basketball game, but again with not a lot to love there. So talking about the games individually for a second before we start breaking them down more specifically, just sort of the games and the game flows. Overall concerns with the teams. So you have 4 of these 8 teams playing on the front end of a back-to-back. Absolutely nobody played yesterday, but the Hawks and the Spurs, that entire game, both teams are playing again tomorrow, and the Nuggets and the Rockets also play again tomorrow. So a little bit of extra concern for each of those teams in the event of a blowout, maybe a little quicker to go to the bench. Obviously, of course, the Spurs, some reputation for that as we get towards the end of the year. No real pace differential between these 4 games. They're all between 221.5 and 228.5, which is statistically that 3% not incredibly relevant. But if you are concerned, the Hawks being the fastest game and Denver and Golden State being the slowest, so to speak. So, LA and the Thunder, neither team on a back-to-back, which is nice, but obviously a huge line. LA, presumably that line might even move a little worse, but with Kuzma not playing, you have to wonder about their ability to put up a functional offense or defense, keep this game at all close. We'll have some appeal for guys, of course, due to that extra usage that's going to be available, but some concern there to be sure, and they have lots of Jamarios and Bongos and fun things on the bench to throw in there if shit gets out of hand. Oklahoma City, again, everyone in play, obviously, because of the brilliant matchup, but minutes threatened due to the potential blowout. Atlanta going into a really difficult environment in San Antonio, also missing several of their players. San Antonio, again, plays tomorrow, as does Atlanta. Little more likely than most other teams to pull their studs if things get out of control, with a very popular Derek White, Aldridge, and DeRozan and Gay all being guys who take some usage. How many of them get there before this game blows out, if it does? Houston, not a lot wrong with Houston, actually. Houston probably in a vacuum my favorite team here. Game's supposed to remain kind of close. Rockets on a back-to-back, unfortunate, but going into Sacramento is a nice pace-up spot. I like Houston, I suspect, more than most people on this slate. I find I would be building a lot of lineups before I didn't have a Harden or a Paul or a Capella in one of them. Sacramento not in a bad spot. Slight pace down. Worst thing for them, just the fact that sort of their big 7 is back. We'd been treated to recent absences by Bielitsa and Bagley. So the minutes a little thinner there, just because someone's going to get the haircut, as I think Josh says, where either Bielitsa, most likely, but potentially Bogdanovic, and also certainly Cauley Stein. Any of those guys could randomly end up with a 19-minute game. But again, I like this game quite a bit in Sacramento. Certainly a team I have some appeal for. And at Denver and Golden State, obviously all five guys on Golden State are, relative to other teams, very expensive. If you sum up their price and them costing, I don't know, $42,000 or whatever it would cost if you added them all up, one of the highest in the league. Everybody can't get there. The pace is the slowest on the slate. Some concern there. Blowout, not a non-concern in a 9-point game, not a non-concern in any game, but certainly could happen as well. And then Denver, a team that runs really deep. Again, the prices on a few of those guys more tolerable, but everyone priced about where they should be. So certainly looking at the slate overall, I have some degree of trepidation with all the teams. Still a little bit sick, so thanks for people tweeting me the link. Makes my life easier. Retweeting it. On in 15, someone responded with, sounds a lot like my ex-wife. I don't even know what that, I don't get that one. And I like a good wife joke as much as the next man. So now that everyone is filed in here, let me refresh our ownership projections. Make sure I haven't missed an update there. Certainly could have gotten one with the news that Kuzma will not be plying his trade this evening. Nope, we still have him in ranked at 16%, so anyone within the sound of my voice who can give me a refresh on the ownership rankings, that would be useful. Yeah, I really am not a big fan of Atlanta tonight. That is probably where I differ from the field the most. We currently have on DraftKings, and I presume on FanDuel, I'll click on in a second, but 3 of our top 5 projected owned players in the Awesemo.com rankings play for Atlanta. I can't get behind that. I would come under on all of them pretty significantly. So, God, there's so many reasons why I don't know where to start. You're going into San Antonio, which is a very good defensive team. It's an excellent defensive team at home, specifically. So let's look at the last time they played. These two teams got together a few weeks ago, and if you liked Atlanta, this was, I think, a decent outcome for you. They weren't terribly productive. Only scored 104 points for a team with the pace they have. That is well low, and they're projected to get on top of that total by a bit tonight. Hawks only shot 39% from the field and 30% from 3 in that game. I wouldn't be surprised if both of those came up. But this game occurred only not quite a month ago, on the 6th of March. And for the Hawks, there were no good players. No. Now, I know John Collins is out. I know Taurean Prince is out. That is going to change things a little bit. We will get there and talk about it. But Trae Young had 37. That's not good enough. Alex Len had 25 in his 28.5 minutes, by the way, which is more minutes than I project him for tonight. If he stays out of foul trouble, stays healthy, all that good stuff, I think he would get a little bit on top of this. I think, getting 30, 31, 32 out of him, certainly not impossible in this spot. There is a ceiling there, but not a great matchup. 28 minutes, 25 fantasy points for him. Kevin Huerter, 28 minutes, 19 fantasy points. That's not good enough. John Collins only played 25 minutes, 35 fantasy points. So I guess he played a good game. That is very productive, 1.4 fantasy points for me. He's not playing, by the way. Taurean Prince only played 19 minutes, 22 fantasy points, but that wasn't good enough. Kent Bazemore, 17. Vince Carter, 17 in his 28.5 minutes. Kent Bazemore played 28 minutes, had 26 fantasy points. That's, I guess, the best play on this team in that game. 20 minutes for Bembry, 12. 15 minutes for Jalen Adams, 11. 14 minutes for Alex Poitras, 12 fantasy points. So literally these two teams played a month ago, and no one was good. No one. I think you'd be fine on a 4-game slate with Bazemore's 26.5 for like 4,100. That feels okay. Although 28 minutes, that's about as much as he's going to get. And keep in mind, this was in Atlanta, which is a much better environment for the Hawks to play, and they do play much better at home. And the Spurs do play much better on the road, and they managed to keep the game close. And yes, still you wanted absolutely 0 players from this game. Now, I like several Atlanta players tonight. I like having some exposure to Atlanta. These guys are cheap. We are missing Taurean Prince. We are missing John Collins. We'll talk about a minutes projection in a minute. But I hear people saying, yeah, I have 4 Hawks. I have 5 Hawks, someone said to me. I think that's lunacy. I think you were on DraftKings, which I believe was the last reference. I think you're just guaranteeing a loss. I guess not guaranteeing. There is always a chance this game stays close and all 5 of your Hawks get there. I think that is crackerjack crazy shit. So, again, in that game, Trae Young, it wasn't good enough. He took 24 shots. That's a lot. I'm at 28 shots tonight. Dude is going to attempt to blunt force his way into some fantasy points. No problem with him in a tournament. 9,100 on FanDuel. I think it's 83, 8,400 on DK. Certainly a chance that even in not a great environment, he can blunt force his way into some fantasy goodness for you. Probably, I guess we'll sort of start at the top. So the best play from this game is Justin Anderson on FanDuel, where he's a shooting guard and $3,600. Just go ahead and load him on in there. You don't need to have him because you can certainly see a world in which, I don't know, we'll say Dennis Schroeder and DeMar DeRozan have great games, and on a 4-game slate on FanDuel where raw points is much more of a thing, you could certainly see those guys having 35 and 45 fantasy points, and that's going to do you better than having Justin Anderson as a drop. And there's lots of guys to drop here, but no amount of Justin Anderson on FanDuel would seem like too much for me. Alex Len is fine. I like Alex Len as a play. It costs only a little bit more than $5,000. The matchup, again, not good. The matchup for none of these guys is good. But can certainly get his back-to-backs, get a few blocks, can put together a 40 fantasy point game for you here. I think he's very good. I don't want him if he's 41% owned, which is what we currently have the ownership on DK. Again, if there's been one way that it seemed to me we've collectively made the most money this year, it's fading bad chalk. And I cannot get behind 40% Alex Len. Even setting aside ownership, he would be my number 5 or 6 center on DK. I really like DeMarcus Cousins. I don't know, about 5 or 6. I think he might be up as high as 4. I really like Clint Capella, who's not getting near as much ownership as he should. I would rather play Steven Adams for $1,000 more. Yeah, I imagine he would be... No, actually, Deonte Davis is center only. I would rather play Deonte Davis pretty significantly. I have their minutes different by 4. I have Len right now at 27 minutes and Deonte Davis at 23. Len is a better player, but Deonte Davis is the stone nuts minimum. I would prefer JaVale McGee. So no, I think he might be all the way down at like my 6th favorite center. And then if he's going to be that chalky, I'll just look elsewhere. So I guess the overall theme there for me would be, yeah, I think stacking up on the Hawks, you need the game to stay close, which is far from a lock, and you need multiple guys to be efficient. I almost don't want Trae Young if I'm going to do that. Like, if you're telling me I'm going to play 4 Hawks, I probably want Trae Young the hell out of there, because if he's having a good game, it's because he took 25 or 30 shots, and then what odds are you leaving that all these other guys managed to get there with their 8 shots? Could happen, but the Spurs not a team that gives up a tons of steals and blocks. Like, it just seems to be more of a setting myself up for failure type situation there. So specifically to talk about these other guys a little bit more. And again, in that last game I alluded to, John Collins and Taurean Prince collectively played 44 minutes. And those minutes will be largely amortized and distributed among the rest of the team, but how many of those guys, if they got 3 more minutes, all of a sudden were going to be? None of them would be great plays. A couple of them would have snuck into not totally shitting on your evening type status. So I imagine the Hawks play this game fairly small. I like Deonte Davis because I think the most likely scenario is what we saw in the last game where he and Alex Len share 48 minutes at center. They did play some time next to each other in the past, and especially if Jakob Poeltl gets the start at random or anything like that, they may need to get a little bit bigger. And while not the last game, the game previous to that, you had Deonte Davis spend some time on the court next to Alex Len. And again, that last game that I was referring to that took place in early March, there was no Dwayne Dedmon in that game either. So it's a reasonably close simulacrum, excepting the fact that it took place in Atlanta and not in San Antonio. So Len we spoke about. I'm fine with playing any amount of Alex Len. At that ownership, he would be well down my center list. I'm fine with playing any amount of Kent Bazemore. 3,800 on FanDuel is just fine. I'll take a look at the ownership rankings there and see how he compares next to Justin Anderson. I would like Justin Anderson more just because I have him for about 5 more minutes. And that's worth more than Bazemore being a slightly more productive player. But I like Kent Bazemore at 38 and 4,100. Probably my favorite of these wing guys. You can certainly Kevin Huerter. Again, it's a bad matchup for everyone, but generally gets his 28 to 30 minutes, and would be odd to see those minutes come down in this environment with, again, no Prince and now no John Collins. I think they fill most of their time at the 4 with a whole lot of Vince Carter. I'm not surprised to see Deonta Davis back there. Is it possible for Forbes and White to both do well? Sure. They're both cheap enough that I have no consideration there. Like, I'm looking at a lineup right now that has DeRozan and Kevin White in it, and that makes me go, you know, and really have some concern there. But yes, easily you can have White and Forbes get there. They're cheap enough that on a larger slate I wouldn't care much against the Hawks, and certainly on a 4-game slate I have no giant concern. We'll get to the Spurs in a second, but I like Bazemore quite a bit. One lineup on DK, I would probably barely get there over Justin Anderson most times. FanDuel, I don't hate that pivot either for $200 more. Again, we'll take a look at that ownership, which will give me a better idea what I want to do there. Fine playing some DeAndre Bembry. Not surprised if he gets 28 minutes here. I have him projected for 25. Some small chance he still gets 21 or 22, but certainly an upside to be achieved there. I like Vince Carter a lot as a punt, on FanDuel especially. I have him for 25 minutes. There have been a number of games this year where they have rolled him out there just a metric but ton, where it's like, wow, his ass is slightly older than me. Actually, I think he's slightly younger than me. But he's my age, and there were a couple of games where you saw 37 minutes of Vince Carter, and that was very confusing for me. But there's a real upside there where they just go small a ton, and he plays infinite time at the 4. Would you be okay with playing Anderson and Bazemore in the same single-entry GPP? Sure. They're that cheap. I have no issue. I'm basically trying to talk people off. I would be under the field on all these Hawks guys if they're 25, 35, 40+% owned. And I think putting like 4 in a lineup is a really bad idea if you're building one lineup. I'm not saying don't play the Hawks. I have no issue playing Trey or Huerter or Bazemore or Anderson or Bembry or Len or Vince Carter. Certainly, or Deonta Davis. Deonta Davis, the stone minimum, both sites. There's real upside here. There is certainly a scenario in which he starts at the 4 and plays 30 minutes. There is a scenario in which he backs up Vince at the 4 and Alex Len at the 5 and plays 30 minutes. The downside you're looking at, well, the super downside you're looking at is Isaac Humphries, who just signed with this team, 7-foot Aussie dude. This will be his first game in the NBA, and I think it's 50-50 to see minutes, but you know, Deonta Davis plays very little or almost no center and backs up Vince Carter at the 4, and somehow you get 16 or 18 minutes. I think it's about a 5% likelihood. I think the most likely scenario is Alex Len and Deonta Davis share all the minutes at the 5, or at least until we get to potentially blowout time. But there is real upside there for him. I like him quite a bit. He's probably my favorite Hawk, and he's the 7th owned Hawk, I think, as far as ownership goes. I feel like that's enough time dumping on that team. But yeah, we will. I look forward to the pooping on me later. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the Spurs. Yeah, I love Derek White. He has shot shitty. I'll pull it up, but in the last 3 games or last 4 games, there's like an 0 for 10 and a 2 for 10, and like he's just has not made any shots. At all. 3 for 10, 2 for 3, 2 for 7, 0 for 10 in the last 4 games. But 3 of those games between 28 and 30 minutes, 4 of the last 5 games between 28 and 30 minutes, did get yanked in only 20 minutes against Cleveland. So that is, you know, a downside. He, along with everyone else, is certainly subject to some rest in this game. 4,700 on DK is too cheap. And, again, game log watching a dangerous habit. But when they played the Hawks in Atlanta, he had 50. So, obviously, not impossible whatsoever. He's just too cheap at 4,700. He is point per dollar my favorite play on the slate pretty significantly. He's 50% owned, So by all means, feel free to get away from it. There's the minutes threat. There's, again, the fact that he can apparently shoot 0 for 10 from the field. So at 50%, feel free to get away. But I would play more than the 50%. And apparently the only piece of the chalk that I would end up actually over on. FanDuel, you save $1,700 by going to Bryn Forbes. And I think Derek White at $6,200 is very much in play on FanDuel. DK is $100 less than Derek White in a single lineup. I think that's crackers. In a lot of lineups, you're going to want to play guys against the Hawks. It's a 4-game slate, so I like some exposure to Bryn Forbes. DeRozan and Aldridge, I will say, A, I'm not surprised if this game is a blowout. B, they are on a back-to-back in the beginning of April. There is a real chance these dudes get yanked, so it's an ownership consideration, because obviously they have upside against the Hawks. You can slap out some giant games here. We have DeRozan at 22% and Aldridge at 23%. I would have less than that of both. Again, it's a 4-game slate, so those aren't, giant ownership percentages, but they're big enough where if they each play 25 minutes and put their asses on the bench, I'm not surprised. Even as some sort of like in-game rest thing where they're just up 10 and Pop uses this as an example to get guys a little bit more rest, that happens a lot too. Rudy Gay, I like about as much as those two guys because of the discount. You're saving, $3,000 roughly on the differential between those two guys on FanDuel, and a little bit less on DK. I'm fine with Rudy Gay. I want the news he's starting. If he's not starting, I probably at that point would have no interest, or at least much less interest. He would go from me having 10%, so maybe 15 in 150 lineups, to having like 4. Power forward sucks on FanDuel. 38 out of Marcus Aldridge may still get you there. All right, so FanDuel, one of the reasons I and some of the people talking in chat a little while ago like FanDuel is because it sort of adds this other tier of decision making with scarcity, where LaMarcus Aldridge, is not near the best point per dollar play on FanDuel. It just doesn't make sense. But there's a real chance he's the highest scoring power forward on FanDuel by 19 points, and so that really changes it around a little bit. The lineup I was tinkering with right now has Jeremy Grant and PJ Tucker in it, but obviously neither of those guys must plays. Jeremy Grant at 56, I imagine will be the most popular one on the slate, and probably should be. Matchup with the Lakers, the time is going to be there, so that probably is the best point per dollar play. Aldridge 9,900. I like Aldridge. He's shown he can get 60, 70. Someone just tweeted me any word on Kuzma. Kuzma is out, I believe. I'm nearly certain. Millsap 7,200 in a difficult spot for him where he's struggled in the past. Bagley 7,000. That feels okay. Point per dollar, going to get his 28, 30 minutes. Rarely him who's getting the minutes haircut in these games, so that feels okay. Draymond at the exact same price. Always in play in tournaments for me just because can get infinite steals and blocks, but I don't like the matchup with Denver. Not a spot he's been great at in the past. I don't expect that to work out great. And then you're on PJ Tucker, Jonathan Williams, punt. So power forward is very, very thin, and ain't nobody priced that good. So I'm a real fan of PJ Tucker and Jeremy Grant, because Jeremy Grant kind of cheap and points per dollar feels good, and PJ Tucker 4,100 you're looking at as a potential drop, but certainly not impossible in a close game that he pulls together 30 fantasy points in his 35 minutes. But yeah, there is real merit to LaMarcus Aldridge on FanDuel, and that if he gets 43 fantasy points, that may still be in the best possible lineup. So it's a little peculiar there, but I do think that point is instructive and worth mentioning. Thoughts on Jonathan Williams? I'm fine with him on FanDuel for the aforementioned reasons. If I have $600, I would rather play PJ Tucker. But the fact that no Bron, no Kuzma now means you have a realistic path of getting to mid-20s in minutes for Jonathan Williams. I would rather play Mo Wagner at 3,800, still forward eligible there. But on a 4-game slate, Jonathan Williams certainly not out of play. Could play the entire fourth quarter, wouldn't shock me at all. So for the rest of the Spurs, Pirtle, you'd like to see him starting, is going to be in play at that DK price in this matchup regardless. Feel free to throw him out there in any amount of tournaments you like. I'm not surprised if he plays 16 minutes. I'm not surprised if he plays 26. And that last one would feel pretty good. Patty Mills is minimum price on FanDuel where he makes a great punt. Also 3,500 on DK. That's obviously a little stickier to get to there. Bellinelli makes another excellent pivot off Justin Anderson, depending on how popular he ends up being, and I imagine he is. I'll just trundle over to FanDuel real quick in our ownership rankings and see where he is, but I have a feeling he's top 2. He's number 1. There's 56% Justin Anderson. So, again, FanDuel, he's $3,600 points per dollar. He is probably my favorite of these cheap dudes, but in a single tournament lineup, I would rather play Reggie Bullock for $200 more. I would much rather play Kent Bazemore on the same team. Although we have Kent Bazemore at 33%, but I would rather play Bazemore at 33 than him at 56. Bellinelli at 3,900, I would rather play more. Monty Morris at 3,900, and I imagine 2% ownership. Not hard to imagine that game blows out in Oracle. He could get there. Hoarder at 45. Obviously, now we're spending some more money. But although shout out to, I like Dennis Schroeder quite a bit at 5,100 in this matchup. There's any number of ways he demolishes that price. And we have him projected at 22%, which is good. He should be. So let's move on to another game. We'll come back to this in questions. Should there be any wrinkles or nuances I did not fully discuss? Sort of backtracking a little bit to the first game, talking about the Lakers and the Thunder. Again, no Kuzma, no LeBron, obviously. Tyson Chandler also out. I like JaVale McGee just fine. On FanDuel, I'm going to try to come up with $200 to play DeMarcus Cousins. I prefer DeMarcus at that price and at their ownership levels. On DK at $7,000, he's very good. I would rather play Clint Capella if I can come up with the money, but there's still no Tyson Chandler. It's an absolutely fine spot for him. He's spent quite a bit on the time on the court against Steven Adams here when he was with Golden State and looked just fine. They played earlier this year. He played 20 minutes, spent about 14 of them on the court with Steven Adams, had like 35 fantasy points. There's still all the ceiling in the world for JaVale McGee. No issue with you playing JaVale McGee. I am not concerned about that matchup at all. I have no problem going back to Lance whatsoever. Last game was obviously a train wreck, but the 3 before that looked just fine. And again, all the usage on this team is there for the taking. So Lance Stevenson has a giant upside at much more tolerable ownership now because people look at the last one game way more than they should. I like Lance a lot. Bearing the lead a little bit, I really like Rajon Rondo. Again, over 50 in the last couple games, not surprising. He's going to have a lot to do with anything this team can do. There's really no one on this team you look to go out there and make their own shot outside of Lance. JaVale McGee is going to need to get fed. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is going to need to get fed. Reggie Bullock is going to need to get fed. So I like Rondo just fine. He is still too cheap. 7,500 on FanDuel, too cheap. 6,600 on DK, way too cheap. KCP is fine. He's about correctly priced, but I have him projected for a little bit north of 30 here, so he's actually is a little bit low. I do expect him to take a lot of shots, see his 30 what have you minutes. So I generally like the Lakers simply because of their prices. Obviously, any number of ways this shit goes sideways. But Wagner, my favorite of the, sort of that Williams, Wagner, Caruso at his price. Caruso would be the next one I would go to. Yeah. Looking at the Thunder, I have Russell Westbrook scoring about 1.5 points less than James Harden today at the respective discounts you get for him of $400 cheaper on DraftKings and $700 cheaper on FanDuel. I slightly prefer Westbrook from a raw points perspective, but I expect him to be higher owned. Looking over at the ownership, Westbrook 35%, Harden 21%. So at that point, if the money is available and obviously the positional rotation, if you will, on FanDuel, then yeah, I like playing Jimmy if you can get to him. So I slightly prefer Jimmy. I have no issue with any amount of Westbrook. It's just a fine spot for him. I'm projected well into the high 50s. Not a ton to add there. Paul George makes about as much sense for me in tournaments just because his ownership is going to be so much lower. We haven't seen the ceiling in about a half dozen games. He's still getting buckets of minutes, but his health obviously still a concern. Spoke about the fact that his shoulder is still raw. If he takes a bump on it, it's tough for him for the rest of the game. And If you play basketball, you're going to get bumped on the shoulder pretty frequently. Curry versus Clay. At their prices, especially in a game where I'm not looking to spend money, I would rather play Klay Thompson. And, you know, these two teams, this will be the fourth time they got together this year. Clay has a better performance than Curry does. It's a really... I mean, I like Clay legitimately. I like DeMarcus Cousins on both sides legitimately. I'm fine with Draymond. I'm a little weary of Steph and Durant. I would probably rather play Steph. Durant's usage has really started to bottom out a little bit. I don't have an issue, obviously, with Steph Curry or Kevin Durant in tournaments. One of those guys scores 70 tonight, I'd be like, well, okay, there it is. Like, I would not be shocked whatsoever. So, of course, they're in play and their ownership is going to be well down because they just don't profile that well in any sort of algorithm that you're running. And so, for that reason, their ownership will be down enough, but it's down for a very good reason. I like Jeremy Grant a lot at 5,600, 5,000. We can put him in just about anything. He's fine in cash. Fine tournament upside there. I like Steven Adams. FanDuel, probably not going to get there that much at 7,000, but 6,100 on DK, again, would much rather go there than, say, Alex on. Very good in both games this year, unsurprisingly, against the Lakers, 40-something. Like, I'm really happy if I can come up with that $800,000 to play Steven Adams instead. Dennis Schroeder I like a lot. Little nicer if you're not playing Russell Westbrook. But 5,100, 5,200. We had that one game in there where the minutes bottomed out, and he's shot badly. But he's playing 30-whatever minutes. It's a similar situation to Lance, in which just like all the upside in the world is there if he gets it going. Lance in a slightly better situation because of the fact that, you know, the team is completely devoid of usage at this point. You've got Dennis Schroeder is going to be spending time next to Westbrook and obviously next to Paul George, who are also in tremendous spots. So less exciting for that reason, but I still have Schroeder projected north of 30 minutes and 5,100, especially on FanDuel, north of 30 minutes against the Lakers. Really hard for me to get away from. Yeah. I guess, you know, really reasonable chance of a blowout here, so one of those fun spots to run out some Nerlens Noel, although I would have him pretty far behind Deonta Davis. Let's go ahead and talk about game number 3, going all the way down to the 10 p.m. on the East Coast spot. The game on the West Coast, though, in Sacramento, with the Rockets coming to town. Again, 7 West Coast teams tonight. Only the Hawks representing the right coast. Yeah, these two teams just played 3 days ago. 3 days ago, I think. And Harden threw up an 85 burger. That's a good game. That could happen again today. And if it did, you'd want to have James Harden. That's the kind of analysis you can't pay for. That's why it's free. But again, I have Harden projected a little bit higher than Westbrook. If we're going to have Westbrook owned 50% more, I'd probably go with James Harden there. I really like Harden and Paul and Capella. Capella does very well against this team, against Willie Cauley-Stein. Bagley ain't going to stop him if he gets out there. 75 on DK is too cheap. 9K on FanDuel is very much in play for me. I don't have logs here. I just have my notes, so I will pull up. But my notes indicate that he's put a pretty good tarring on him for the last couple of years. And I watched... Oh, I even had a picture on this one. That's cute. Sure, last 2 seasons, he's got 4 games primarily against Willie Cauley-Stein. 53, 55, 50, and 36 fantasy points. I don't have any externalities in the 36 fantasy point game. But again, I project him for well more than that. I have him a good bit over 40, 7,500, and again, lower ownership than, say, I don't know, Alex Len. I'm pretty excited to play Clint Capella today. It's really a good matchup for all of these guys. Even with Harden getting his 80 whatever the hell last game, Chris Paul got his 40 again. Chris Paul's played 3 games against the Kings this year. He got over 40 in all of them, and he cost $7,100, and he's not going to be that owned. So I haven't projected for less than 40. I have him at 38.5 right now, but that's just sort of what the raw numbers give me. But it should be worth pointing out that that would be his worst game of the year, and that doesn't feel too shitty for me at 7,100 on DK or out of play at 82 on FanDuel. He has not looked as good. We haven't seen really ceiling games out of Chris Paul recently. He would be my least favorite of these three guys to play. But at his ownership, certainly a spot in which he can get an upside. Just does very well against De'Aaron Fox. If you went back and watched as much tape as I do, you would just see that he bodies him a lot. He posts him a lot. Just, Fox can't handle him on defense whenever they're up against each other. So unsurprisingly, there's been a reasonably safe floor for there. But I like having, if I'm building a single lineup, I want one of those big three Rockets in it. I feel pretty bad if I don't have one. I don't have a problem with two. Again, we expect this game to stay close more than we expect any of the other games to stay close. So yeah, hard to imagine a scenario in which they all fail. And it's like, nope, you only got 35 out of Capella and 33 out of Paul and 53 out of Harden. It could happen, but I'm going to be surprised if tournament winning lineups tonight don't have at least one of those three Rockets. I would rather play PJ Tucker than Eric Gordon, counting position and everything else going on there if I had to pick one of those two guys. Looking at the Kings for a minute here, again, as I alluded to in the intro, if you will, they're big seven all back, which adds a little bit of uncertainty for Bogdanovic, who sometimes doesn't get the minutes, or Bjelica, who doesn't get the minutes, or Cauley Stein, who doesn't get the minutes. So each of those guys, while in play for me, are tournaments only, because there are real scenarios in which they get 20 minutes instead of 30 minutes. I see there's a ton of questions coming in. I will get to those, I promise you. I'm just going to finish getting through the game breakdown real quick. Yeah, so I like Fox, was very good 3 days ago. I like Hield. I have them point per dollar ranked very, very similarly. I'm absolutely fine with one of them. Again, I probably want a member of the Kings, especially if we expect this game to stay close. It's whatever works a little better in your lineup. I don't have a big differentiator between those. Don't really want to go to Harrison Barnes in the spot. Again, there's a bit of pace down for the Kings. Barnes, while not shooting that well, is just always a guy who's going to get you, 13 to 19 points and 4 to 7 rebounds and not a whole hell of a lot else. So cash 4,800 on DK. I don't mind falling into that. Tournaments, again, he'd be pretty low for me. But I like Fox. I like Hield. I still like Bogdanovic in tournaments. 59 and 53 is still a little too cheap. I think he's exactly like 1,700 less than Hield on both sites. I slightly prefer Hield at those prices, but only by a hair when you count the prices. And Bagley himself, I like more on FanDuel, where he's priced much better. 7,000 on FanDuel is just, as far as a raw value rating, a better number than 6,700 on DK. And power forward on FanDuel, you have to play two, and it's a shit position. So for all those reasons, I'm a pretty big fan of him on FanDuel. Fine if he ends up there on DK. Decent spot for him, but not a brilliant one. A little below average, but 4 games late. No issue with you having some Marvin Bagley. Yeah, okay. And then this last game, which is a great basketball game, which I really have an issue liking anyone much in fantasy. Jokic is fine. He's generally struggled a bit against the Warriors. He has had a couple ceiling games. Like his last 4 games, I want to say, were around 40 fantasy points, and that obviously is not enough for you. If I'm building one lineup, I'm not going to have Nikola Jokic in it. Now, if you go back over the last, I think, about 2.5 years, you will find he has 2 70-point games against this team, so it can obviously happen. I'd have some exposure in large tournaments, but it is not a good matchup for him. The price is low enough that I still think he's absolutely just fine of a play. He's probably a little better than Alex Len to me, but he'd also be in that, 5 to 6 range for the centers, especially when we have somewhat compelling punts like Deonta Davis, and you can just pay up for more Westbrook, Harden type dealios. Everyone else for the Nuggets, I guess either Jamal Murray or Paul Millsap would be my favorite. It is legitimately a tough spot for them, setting aside the fact that they're on the road in Oracle, which doesn't help. Just projections on paper, none of them look that great for me. I think if I'm building 150 lineups, I'd have something like 10 Millsap and 10 Murray and 8 Jokic and I think a little more Barton than Gary Harris. But actually, I'd have a little more Harris because of the price. I'd have a little more Gary Harris than Barton, so you'd be looking at 6 Harris and 4 Barton in an ideal world if I built out all these lineups by hand. But really tough to like anyone here. I like Monty Morris on FanDuel as a drop, where if this game goes absolutely out of control very, very quickly, he gets to run the second unit for the last 14 minutes of the game. But I'm pretty hesitant on the Nuggets for that reason. But it's I don't want to overstate that. Murray and Millsap and Jokic have an upside. If you have a tournament lineup with one of those three dudes in it, I feel just fine in it. But has been a difficult spot for them. Again, across the ball, generally I think I like DeMarcus Cousins a little bit more than Klay Thompson. I like the micro matchup a bit more for Cousins. Has looked good against Jokic in the past. Not somewhere I expect him to struggle. I prefer Steph a little bit to Durant, but they would be my least favorite too. For me, it's going to be Cousins, then Klay. Then Draymond Green, just because it's $7,000 on FanDuel with the more favorable scoring, $5,900 on DK on a 4-game slate. That can work just fine. Favorite center on FanDuel? I don't know. That's going to be really close and depend what else you're doing and game correlation a lot. I do not mind $9,000 Clint Capella, though I would prefer $8,500 DeMarcus Cousins. JaVale McGee is 83. That's obviously more than I want to spend there. Jokic is, I mean, at 10-6, he is priced to move there. I don't mind punting Deontay Davis. And Alex Len is priced much better there, which is certainly a very relevant concern. DK has many more very well, like DeMarcus Cousins is a very good deal on DK. Clint Capella is a very good deal on DK. A number of centers are priced really well there. FanDuel, it's not quite the same thing. So getting Len at a very similar price on FanDuel feels objectively a little bit better. There we go. We've gone through the game. So let me do some news check alert. Tweet. Please rank the Lakers on FanDuel in a GPP, thinking about a risky Wagner at center. I would play Deontay Davis over Mo Wagner on, well, both sites. On DK, again, I actually have them sitting next to each other in the lineup I built before. And Wagner gains power forward eligibility there, which is a little more exciting for me. I don't have a problem playing Wagner at center in a GPP lineup on FanDuel in a 4-game slate, but I would prefer Davis. I would prefer Len there, looking at cheap centers. More raw points on FanDuel, Davis or Wagner. I have Davis for actually quite a few more. I have Mo Wagner for, I think, 21 fantasy points, and I have Deontay Davis for about 24.5. So I like Davis a little bit more. Similar, floor and ceiling for the minutes you could see out of these guys. Pretty surprised if you don't catch 20 out of each of them. You're kind of hoping to get 30. Gary Harris versus Bazemore straight up. I have Bazemore projected for more, but Gary Harris, I imagine, is a quarter of the ownership. So I'm probably going to play Gary Harris in that spot. I'm just going to try to get away from the Hawks as much as I can. Again, we don't have Prince. We don't have Collins. That's going to help a lot. They're going to have to run guys out at the wing a lot there, but some of those minutes are going to Humphreys, and more of those minutes are going to go to Davis than discussing that previous game that he got. That was before his signing, so he didn't play any. So, like, even if you look at that last game and ignore the fact we're going from Atlanta, where no one was good, to San Antonio, there were 44 minutes of John Collins and Taurean Prince in that game. Let's say we give 24 of those to Deontay Davis. I got 20 minutes left, and I'm moving from Atlanta to... So, I don't get me wrong. I imagine I would put the over-under on Hawks I want in a tournament-winning lineup tonight at 1.5. I think 1 is probably like 1.4. I think 1 is more likely than 2. I'm really surprised if that number is 3, 4, or 5. And we will see. We really won't see because you cannot look at a sample size of 1 when running a projection, but that's where I come in. Favorite punt under 4K on DK? There's a lot. Bazemore or Wagner or... Don't mind Tucker. Don't mind Pirtle. All these guys are going to profile pretty similarly to me. I'd like to see a Spurs starting lineup. Stevenson or Bielitsa on FanDuel. I'd much rather have Stevenson. There's a real chance Bielitsa goes down 20, 22 minutes. Matchup not nearly as good as far as the pace goes. And with all those guys out, real chance you get, real ceiling Lance game here. So, DDR versus LaMarcus Aldridge, DK Cash. I would play Aldridge and Cash between those two guys. Reggie Bullock, thoughts? I like him a lot. He's one of a number of guys I would rather play than all these Hawks guys. I think he Probably plays in the high 20s in minutes. It's not a good matchup. The offense is going to be somewhat dysfunctional. But just at the ownership, he's got the mark of Kane on him. I would rather run Reggie Bullock out there. Favorite center on FanDuel, we already talked about that, is playing all of the Rockets' big three in a line going too far in a DK GPP. Looking at last game versus Sacramento, they all played well, so curious. Yeah, Chris Paul has played well in every game. Clint Capella only played 2 of the 3 games and had, like, Chris Paul had 40 all 3 times he played them this year. Clint Capella had 50 both times he played them this year. And Harden had, 85, and I think Harden played all 3 and had low 50s, mid 50s, and 85. So, no, on a 4-game slate, you can obviously stack a game. I want to play De'Aaron Fox or Buddy Hield or at least one significantly priced king in that lineup, running it back. But no, I think stacking that game and having all 3 of those Rockets is an absolutely fine lineup. I would rather have 2 than 3. You are asking for things like you really need to be stacking that game and hoping for overtime, and like you really need shit to go well to play them all. But especially on DK, they're priced really well. I don't have an issue with running that lineup. In general, I would rather play 2 of those 3 than all 3 of those 3. Bellinelli pivot from Anderson. Sure, I like that quite a bit. Vince or Anderson, best small forward on DK under 4,400. Raw points, it's going to be Anderson for me, and I think his ownership on DK is a more tolerable 25% or something. I will take a look and make sure I'm answering your question replete. Yeah, I mean, I would rather run... I mean, from raw points for me would be Anderson, then Hoarder, then Vince, actually, for me, for what it's worth. Actually, Bazemore is there, too, so I would have Vince well down on that list. I would, just raw points, I would have Anderson, Hoarder, Bazemore before I got to Vince Carter. I actually have PJ Tucker for 1.5 points more than I have Vince Carter. And I like Vince Carter. Go old man ball. But I'm not sure he plays 30 minutes. He could. I think he's just fine in tournaments for that reason. But Vince or Bembry on FanDuel, all else aside. Raw points, I prefer Bembry. Counting their price tags. I think I have Vince a hair higher at 36 than Bembry 45, I think are the numbers there. But very close if you're asking just sort of which I prefer as far as raw points. Bembers. Which Spur has the better game, Gay or Bertans? Gay. Which is the better DK play? Gay. Rondo or Murray on FanDuel? I would run Rondo. Pretty significantly. By any role. Now, I presume we will have Rajon Rondo owned well more than him, and that should factor into your calculus. We have Rondo currently at, I don't see him, so either I'm blind or he's really way too low. 11%, that's way too low for Rondo. We have Jamal Murray at 7, but if that projection is anywhere near right, then yeah, I'll play Rondo. I have Rondo projected north of 40. Obviously, there's some risk. It's Rondo. Risky dude. But, yeah. I'm a pretty big fan of Rondo with no one else there. Like, can he fail? Sure. I can't guarantee he's going to see 30 whatever minutes again. Maybe they go heavy on Caruso. But, I like the fact that the Lakers aren't playing again. He's not a guy they're trying to protect. He's not their point guard of the future. Lonzo's their point guard of the future. So they'll let him go out there, rack up some stats, look better for his next contract. Yeah. Other questions. Go ahead and tweet me questions if you're in the YouTube chat because I can't see much. Caruso or Forbes FanDuel GPP if price doesn't matter? I have Forbes projected a little bit higher. They both have pretty nominal ownership, so most times my answer there is going to be Forbes. I asked if I should pair Horford and Tatum yesterday. That would have been good. Memory serves, that would have worked extremely well. Yesterday went very well, but I was not very high on the Celtics, and Horford and Tatum had excellent games, both of them. Now you're asking if pairing Murray and Fox on FanDuel would be a nice GPP play. I don't... unless I misunderstand your question, because Horford and Tatum played on the same team in a difficult matchup. So there was a question when you asked, which was like, I wasn't particularly thrilled with either of them. I like them both a little bit. They both got individual mentions before you asked the question, but you needed both of them to have good games in a difficult matchup. That's obviously going to decrease your likelihood. Talking about pairing Murray and Fox, one has nothing to do with the other. I think Fox is fine to play. I think Murray is fine to play. They're both going to be low-owned, and they both have an upside. In a vacuum, I would rather play Chris Paul in that range if I have no other Rockets. I would rather play Rajon Rondo, etc. But I'm not going to look at a GPP lineup with Jamal Murray and De'Aaron Fox in it and be like, oh, that's a crazy lineup. C. Davis or Wagner on DK. Am I forgetting a Davis? So it literally says initial C. Davis. I only know D. Davis. The only Davis I know is Deonta Davis, and it's the only one I can see. I checked for you, though. I would rather play Deonta Davis at 3,000 than Mo Wagner at 3,800, assuming that money gets me anything. And I still have Davis actually projected just a hair higher. So I imagine I would play Davis most times there. Lance or Justin Anderson on Yahoo. I would play Lance because Justin Anderson's just going to be much, much higher owned. Harrison Barnes or Barton on a FanDuel GPP. I would rather play Barton. I don't really want to play either of those guys. But again, building, FanDuel, I would rather play Lance than either of them. You are saving some money. And I want to be able to hit an upside. They all project pretty similarly for me. But between Barton and Barnes and Lance Stevenson, I think Lance the most likely to give you a number that'll may win you a tournament. If Jamal Murray is out, which Nugget would you play? I'd play Monty Morris if Jamal Murray is out. Do we have some reason to expect Jamal Murray to be out? I thought he was probable. No news on that. I imagine he plays. It's the Warriors. They are in a back-to-back, so maybe they sit Jamal Murray out, and by all means, have a Jamal Murray playing, because in the event that Jamal Murray is out, I'm going to like Monty Morris an awful lot. We have a Hawks lineup. Okay. Refreshing my alerts. That should bring it up. Young, Horter, Anderson, Carter, and Len. That is what I thought the Hawks lineup would be. So no surprise there. Yeah, that doesn't change a lot. You still can expect to see just bludgeoning usage of, low to mid 30s minutes out of Young. Horter to hope to get hot and get a dozen shots instead of 8. Anderson to play 32, 33 minutes. Again, was just brilliant in the last game, and I don't mean to take anything away from him, but yeah, that matchup against a G League team is a little better than this matchup against San Antonio in San Antonio. Yeah. So Vince Carter will start at the 4, which knowing that now, I would goose his projection probably to 29. And I like Vince Carter a little more than I indicated in my previous analysis. Makes a much more compelling punt on FanDuel. But again, when they played in Atlanta a month ago, he played 28, 29 minutes and had 20 fantasy points or something. Like, I really think people are underestimating how bad the pace and the environment, how good the defense for the Spurs is, and how limited the upside is most days on Vince Carter. I think he's just fine. I just don't think all these guys should be 30, 40% owned relative to other players out there. But there is the lineup. That is the starting lineup I expected, so no surprise there. Oh boy. Adams with an apostrophe. Someone. Fading Westbrook and George, bad idea on FanDuel. No, you can build a perfectly good lineup without either of those players. I really want Dennis Schroeder in that lineup at shooting guard. Adams, Rondo, Clay, or Capella, Paul, Caruso. The first one where I like everyone as opposed to the second one, which is 2 Rockets, which is fine, and then Caruso, which in a single lineup, I'm not going to get to Caruso very often. Davis and Wagner in the same lineup, too risky. No, and again, they don't have anything to do with each other. I don't think Davis is risky. I find Davis much, like when I look at LaMarcus Aldridge, I feel like that's risky. When I look at DeRozan, I feel like that's risky because of that game environment. Deonta Davis costs the stone nut minimum. I think it is fairly likely he plays 48 minus X minutes, where X is the minutes Alex Len plays. And I think that's a little bit conservative, because I think it's more likely than not, I'll go 60%, he plays some time at the 4 in this game, either next to Humphries or Len, or in a blowout next to Hump, or any number of ways that goes that way. So, like, I don't look at Deonta Davis at 3K as risky. I look at a lot of, I look at Hawks going into, I look at Deonta Davis as much less risky than all the Hawks. Rudy Gay starting. Good. I think, well, it doesn't matter, not putting in anything, but I think I loaded him in some lineup. So I presume they're going to start Forbes, White, Gay, DeRozan, and Aldridge. Can still play Pirtle in a GPP lineup. Can be pretty comfortable playing Rudy Gay. I like Rudy Gay a fair amount on FanDuel now. Obviously, a strong matchup, and again, position is garbage. So, you know, Gay and Stevenson probably my favorite pairing there. Vince or Bembry. At their prices, I will now play Vince Carter. I'm fine with Bembry in a tournament, and Vince is going to be more owned than anyone expected in the year 2019 Vince Carter to be. I'm going to be honest, I don't think anyone expected Vince Carter to be playing basketball in the year 2019. But shout out to, I love players who like adjust their game. Shout out to him for being a vastly different basketball player than he was. From literally the human highlight reel, I know that's Dominique Wilkins, but literally being the most high flyering of high flyer guys to sexy, smart, spot-up shooter who, you know, is J.J. Redicky. I can't tell you. It's the same thing. I look at Brook Lopez and go like, wow, he just gets better and better at blocks, better and better at rebounds, and better at shooting three-pointers in his 11th year in the league. Like, I'm a big fan of that. Sorry, just fanboying out there for a second. You have a very unique lineup for tonight. Probably no one has it. No one is a bold statement in all the lineups that get entered here, but I believe you. Forward for DKGPP under 4,400. Again, I'm going to throw a massive pile of names at you. Just so you know, the cashiest is Justin Anderson. In one lineup in tournaments, I would probably play Kevin Huerter. Let's see if we have an ownership update. Last update 43 seconds ago, right on the nose. Derek White down to 48%. Second place, Alex Len, 41%. Third place, Mo Wagner, 37%. Jiminy Christmas, that got out of hand in a hurry. I mean, that really escalated fast. Number 4, Russell Westbrook, 34%. Number 5, Kent Bazemore, 32%. Number 6, James Harden, up to 30. Okay, that's tightening up a little bit. I'm pretty ambivalent on that at that point. I have Westbrook as a slightly better point per dollar play with the discount on both sites. They have basically identical ownership. Paul George up to 24%. That's just some more value. Freeing up, I'd come in under that. Trae Young, 24, sure. Steven Adams, 24, sure. DeMar DeRozan, 23. Clint Capella, 23. Down to Davis, 23. So there that is. And it should be. I'd still want more than that, but that number has come up. Clay, 22. Jeremy Grant, 22. LaMarcus Aldridge, 21. Rudy Gay, 21. Chris Paul, 19. I'd have more than that. Eric Gordon, 19. I'd absolutely have less than that, though I like the idea of pivoting off all the Hawks in the universe. Lance Stevenson, 17. I'd have a little more than that. Lance just has a really big upside here. This is, hasn't played a ton in the games he's played against the Thunder in the past. Maybe he's sore at Russ for mocking his guitar thing. I don't know. But I like Lance. He's cheap enough, and there is a real upside here with everyone out. Rondo at 16% seems crackers to me. Like, I want a lot more Rondo than that. I'd have about double that, I have a feeling. Schroeder, 13. I'd want more than that. Jokic at 11. Like, okay, we're feeling okay here. But again, Len at 41. Fine spot. Fine spot. But, you know, 41. He's literally twice as owned as all the other centers. He's slightly less than double owned Davis, Capella, and Steven Adams, but I like them. Points per dollar, I like Davis probably a little bit more still. I like Capella a little more still. I like Adams just a hair less, but at half the ownership, I would rather go to any of that trifecta of large men. You prefer Lance over KCP on DK? At price, yes. Yahoo Cash, White, Gay, and PG-13, or Harden, Grant, and Wagner. Harden, Grant, and Wagner. Bags, Millsap, or Draymond on DK. I'll probably save the money and play Draymond more often than not. Raw points, it's Bagley, but again, he's 67, Millsap 62, and Draymond is 59. So raw points, yes, play Bagley. Counting price, I'd probably play Draymond. Would you pivot to Lance over Anderson? Yes, in a New York minute. You're 40% on Rondo. Well done. Burr, nip. Here is, yes, Bernie showing his top ownership in the premium Slack chat where he has 4 of his top 8 guys as Hawks, which, yeah, there's a chance that works out for you. If you're lucky, you only get 2 in a lineup, and those are the 2 that end up being good. Rondo and Tucker or Forbes and Bagley, FanDuel GPP, Rondo and Tucker for me. We are coming up on it, everybody. Looking for late breaking news. And we are locked. All right, let's take a look at some ownership. That was kind of fun. I enjoyed that show. I like when there's the appropriate amount of time in a show. Like, we talked about everything I wanted to talk about, handled basically all the questions, but no dead air. It's nice when that works out. All right, let's see what they had going on DK today. 300K again. Way to go, DK. Way to keep it rolling. And it filled, so bravo to you. Loading up some ownership real quick. I'm tempted to run the show for another 30 minutes so we can look at the Hawks ownership. But we will see. Number 1 at 33%. So a pretty good job by the projections there. Mo Wagner. Number 2, a pretty bad job by the projections there. Rajon Rondo at 31%. Yeah, I was 16 seemed a little bit low. Still at 6,600, back-to-back 50-point games. Like, whenever the game log watchers among you get in there and just like, oh, guys had 52 games in a row, and then Kuzma's out. Like, I'm pretty sure that number was going to goose. 31% for Rondo, 27 for Westbrook, about as expected. 22 for Steven Adams. I think that was off by 1%. Pretty good. Kentavious, 19. I'm fine with that. Paul George, 19. I like Westbrook a lot more than George relative to 27 and 19% ownerships. Lance, 18. Okay. JaVale, 17. Big fan. Jeremy Grant, 17. Big fan. Alex Caruso, 12. I'd come in under that. I'm just not the biggest Caruso believer. And, again, like Rondo a lot. Dennis Schroeder, 7% is a travesty. Reggie Bullock, 3.75. Like that. Muscala, 2.3. No thanks. Jonathan Williams, 1.3. Markieff Morris, 0.5. Nerlens Noel, 0.4. Terrence Ferguson, 0.4. Kyle Kuzma, 0.27%. Congratulations. You played yourself. That's about 1/50th of the rate taken care of right there. That was very nice of those Kuzma people to do. Yeah, so there it is. Not one of those shows where I feel like I had a ton to differentiate from the field. Obviously, lower on that Spurs and Hawks game. Rondo, Lance, Caldwell Pope, Wagner, and McGee starting right on lock. Literally came out, hit my first alert at 7:59 and 58 seconds. So I apologize for not seeing that, reading it, and conveying it to you in under a second and a half so that you could react. But guess what? That's who I thought was starting anyway. So we're 100% today on people starting who they were supposed to be starting. So there it is. Looking at, got a couple questions and messages. Let me see if there's anything that seems terribly pertinent to bring up. About 9 people sending me their lineups. Happens every day. What was your FanDuel placeholder lineup? Hold on. Did I screenshot it? I did screenshot it. Russell Westbrook, Chris Paul, Dennis Schroeder, Justin Anderson, Rudy Gay, Lance Stevenson, Jeremy Grant, PJ Tucker, and Nikola Jokic. Now, in fairness, I didn't touch this in the last hour. I would have downgraded. So, like, I didn't touch this after Kuzma news, though I thought he was going to be out. I think I said 60-40 in the chat he would be out. Offhand, I would have downgraded Paul to Rondo, which would have freed up $700. Probably paid up at shooting guard to get away from Justin Anderson. So probably downgraded Jokic, downgraded Paul, upgraded Justin Anderson to Buddy Hield or DeRozan if I could get that high. But probably be a little happier to go with Hield because looking more at that game. But this lineup's fine. I wouldn't have any issue running this out. Westbrook and Schroeder is not super ideal, but shooting guard isn't that great, and 5,100 is just way too cheap for Schroeder, and it's real, I'm not shocked if you get 65 out of Westbrook, and he's the highest scoring player, and Schroeder gets 38. Like, that wouldn't surprise me at all. On DK, which I think I also screenshotted. Are you here? I think it's here. Yep, I do have one. We ended with Rondo, White, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Mo Wagner, Deonta Davis, Russell Westbrook, DeMar DeRozan, and Clint Capella. And again, I tried to find some way to get away from DeMar DeRozan, but I don't hate DeRozan or Aldridge. Obviously, they have upside. Hawks, they can certainly get there. And having one of them is fine. I think the FanDuel one had only Gay, and the DK one has White and DeRozan, but White's so cheap I can't even count him against whatever limit I am imposing in my head. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your time as always. Don't forget your late slate starting at 8:30 and 10 and what have you. I will be back again tomorrow where presumably we'll have more games. Perhaps, dare I say, better games. Until such time, I am Fast Eddie Fear. Bonne chance. Best of luck in your contest.